be written as what?
5 squared.
Perfect. You guys see how that is a 5 squared? I'm not going to rewrite the whole thing. I'm just going to write down that 5 squared so I can identify. This 4 is what? A 2 squared, right? You guys see that okay? You don't need, I'm not going to require you to rewrite it that way, but I am going to require you to recognize that. If you can recognize it in your head, that's fine. If you want to write it down, that's fine too. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're trying to find the center, foci, vertices, and asymptotes. And I'm going to give you guys a hint. The center is always the easiest to find. And then I'll tell you right now, if you graph it first, everything else is a lot easier. Just like how when we did the ellipse, we graphed it first. So let's find our center. We're going to need to find the center. Say that again?
0, 0.
Why is it 0, 0?
Because up by where the x and y intercept, or the x and y's are, they're empty, so it's 0 plus.
There's nothing there, right? Because remember it was the x minus h squared and then the y minus k squared?
Right.
But there's nothing there, it's a 0. Perfect. If this were x minus 1, then the x coordinate would have been 1. You guys remember that? Okay, so I'm also going to need to find some vertices, foci, asymptotes, graph. Let's graph it first. Okay, so when you graph this, bear with me, this is the trick on how you graph every hyperbola. First thing you plot is what? Center. What's my center? 0, 0, right? The next thing I plot is almost identical as to how I graph the ellipse. I'm going to talk about the different radii, and I'm putting it in quotes because it's not actually a circle, so it's not radius, but it's how far I'm going to go in each direction. So look at your original problem. What's underneath my x? The 5 squared, right? Which means I'm going to go how far in the x direction? 5 units. You guys see that? So from my center, I'm going to go 5 units over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in both x directions. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to do those dots. You guys see that? How far am I going to go in my y direction? 2. Why is it 2? Because the 2 squared is underneath the y. So up 2 and down 2. Now, if this were an ellipse, I would connect that as an oval, right? But it's not. It's not an ellipse. What is this? This is a hyperbola. So here's the trick. You're going to draw, instead of an oval, have I got you guys excited, wondering what we're going to draw? What is it? A box. I'm going to have you draw a box.
So a rectangle.
Rectangle. You got it. So let's draw this rectangle. Do you see how I'm taking these 4 outside points, not the center, just the ones on the outside, and I'm connecting it as a perfect rectangle. And it has to be perfect. What happens if it's not perfect? You lose points. Did I wake you up? I'm kidding. I'm not that mean. You don't lose points, but maybe bring a ruler just to be safe. You guys okay with how I drew that? Okay, next. This is what I'm going to plot next, is I'm going to plot the asymptotes. Trust me. This is how slant asymptotes work for hyperbola. You go from the center to the corner of your box. That's why we drew the box. From the center to the corner of your box. And that should connect to both corners on opposite sides. That is your asymptote. So the other asymptote would go from the center to the other corner. And I draw that line. And those are my asymptotes. Slant asymptotes. Can you see that they're slant asymptotes? I did them dotted lines because we typically do asymptotes with dotted lines. Center to the corner, and then center to the corner. Bring a ruler maybe. Be safe. Questions so far? All right, it's a little weird, I know. Next thing we got to do is actually graph the hyperbola. So to actually graph that hyperbola, we need to figure out if this is going to be transverse horizontal or transverse vertical. So what do you guys think? Take a look at my original equation.
Horizontal.
Why is it horizontal? It's, okay, hold on. I heard two things. Really quick. I heard because under the x is bigger, and I also heard because x was first. I also heard because x was squared. Only one of those was correct, and it's because x is first. For ellipse, it mattered which one was bigger. Not for hyperbolas. It matters which one is first. Remember I said for ellipse, A was bigger. For hyperbola, A came first. So it matters which one comes first. So because the x comes first, this is horizontal. Let's write that down really quick.
Yeah.
Transverse horizontal. Because the x came first. You guys okay with that? So that means from my picture, I'm going to pick the vertices on the sides of my box. Top and bottom would be if it was vertical. Since this is horizontal, I'm going to choose the sides. So that's this one and this one. And then you draw, and you just go towards the asymptote, almost like two parabolas.
The X was first?
The X was first, so that meant it's transverse horizontal. So I have to draw it horizontally. That'll work. Okay. Question so far. And this is what I like to do. You don't have to do this, but this is what I like to do. I like to erase that box, because that box was only there to help me draw. It's actually not part of the graph at all. Okay, so that is the graph. We're going to do lots of practice, I promise. That's the graph, but what else is it asking me to find? Vertices, foci, equations of the asymptotes, everything. I found my center already. I'm going to now find my vertices. It's easier to find the vertices first. Just is. So how do I find the vertices? Now I could look at those formulas over there on the sideboard and memorize them. Absolutely. I'm not going to stop you. There's a way easier way. Just look at your picture. These are the vertices. Right there. What are those 2 points? These ones right here. 5, 0. Negative 5, 0. You see, I just looked at it. I could spend a lot of time memorizing those formulas. I'm not going to stop you, but I'm just trying to help you make it easier on yourself. It's visual. That's it. What's the next thing I need to find? Foci. Now, foci, I am going to need a formula. So for foci, for the hyperbola, the formula was c squared equals what? I'm just copying down those formulas over there on the sideboard. Right? So for the hyperbola, that was that formula. You need to identify your c value in order to find your foci. So let's go ahead and do that. In this case, what is, going back to my original equation, what is my a value?
25.
5 or 25? 5. A squared is 25. So my a is 5. What's my b? 2. So this became 5 squared plus 2 squared. So I got c squared equals 29. You guys see that okay?
Do we have to account for the negative in there too?
No. No. Because the negative is part of the standard form of a hyperbola. That negative is what makes it a hyperbola. So what is c equal to?
Square root of plus or minus.
We don't need the plus or minus here because we're going to do the plus or minus in the foci. I won't mark you off if you put it there, but you don't need it quite yet. So, foci. Foci need to be, just as they were for the parabola, the foci needs to be inside that hyperbola. So somewhere over here, right? So there's going to be a focus here, and there's going to be a focus here. Is that correct? So because that's where my two foci are going to be, does that mean the x-coordinate changed or the y-coordinate changed? See how I'm thinking it through? You could have looked at the formula, sure, but looking at that formula is not helpful. Just think it through logically. It's the x-coordinate that changes, which means for my foci, my center, the x-coordinate plus my c value, the y-coordinate stays the same. The x-coordinate minus my c value, the y-coordinate stays the same. Can you guys see that okay? And by the way, that was where I used the plus or minus. Now you could plug that into your calculator. Somebody do me a favor and plug in square root of 29 into your calculator. I'd like a decimal. 5.38. Is that what it is? Oh, I heard 5.38. So that means this is 5.38, comma 0. There's a focus. And then negative 5.38, comma 0. There's another focus. Can you guys see how I labeled those as the foci?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep, that
Okay.
makes sense.
Cool. Okay. What else am I missing from this problem? The asymptotes, that's the other thing it's asking me for. I'm abbreviating. They are slant asymptotes. So, how do I find the slant asymptotes? Now you could, again, look at those formulas on the sideboard and memorize them. That's fine. But I have a better way. I'm going to teach you a better way because I think those asymptotes are hard. So take a second, I'm running out of space here. Just remember this from a long time ago. You guys remember that formula? What was that? What did this mean? It was actually called point slope form of a line, right? Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. It was how you found the equation of a line, right? We're going to use that. It's the same thing as memorizing those formulas, only I just feel like this one might be easier, so I'm just trying to help you out, so bear with me. Oh, and by the way, your x1 and y1 are always your center. Your x1 and y1 are always your center. So copying that down as y minus what? 0 equals plus or minus the slope. I need to find the slope. What do we know about a slope of a line? Now start listing out some characteristics about a slope of a line. What do you know, just in general, about a slope of a line? What is it? Anybody? How do you, like, anything you know about it, just yell out. Rise over run. Rise, run. Y, x. Does that make sense? So, the slope, y, x. Rise over run. Whatever's underneath the y divided by whatever's underneath the x. Rise over run. Does that make sense? And then x minus x1. Can you guys see that okay? Could you simplify that? Sure, you could distribute. I'm going to leave that to you guys to do on your homework. This is fine for me right now. Ta-da! All right, is this in standard form? No, so I got to get it into standard form. How do I do that? All the x's together, all the y's together, and then what am I going to have to do to each of those variables? I'm going to do what? It's called complete the square. You guys remember we did that for the ellipse last time? Okay, so let's rewrite this. All the y's next to each other, all the x's next to each other. So I'm going to have 9y squared minus 90y minus 16x squared minus 32x equals negative 353. Does this sound familiar now? Same way we did the ellipse last time? Okay, all the y's together, all the x's together, loose numbers all on the other side. Now I need to complete the square. So let's look at just the y's for a second. What do I got to do first? I have to do what? Factor out the 9. The coefficient has to be factored out before you can complete the square. So what I'm going to do is, I'll do this in red. Factor out the 9, and then I'm left over with y squared minus 10y. Do you guys see that okay? Then what do I do? Take the middle number, divide it by 2, square it, and that's what's going to go in that empty spot. Is that correct? So in this case, what number is that? 25. So plus 25, but I can't just add 25 for fun. I also got to do it to the other side as well, right? Is it 25?
No, 25 multiplied by 9.
25 times 9. Can you guys see that? Technically, this is a 25 times 9, right? And maybe I should have done that in a different color, but it makes you guys feel, so you guys can see that those were something different there. So 25 times 9 is what?
225.
So that's what's going to the other side. Can you guys see that okay? Now I got to do the exact same thing for the x's. So for the x's, what do I need to factor out? A negative 16. Because that entire coefficient has to be factored out. So that leaves me left over with x squared, and then what?
Plus 2.
Factored out the negative 16. Then what do I do? Take the middle number, divide it by 2, square it, and that's going to go here, right? Which in this case is what number?
1.
So plus 1. Is it really a plus 1?
No.
What is it? 1 times negative 16. And that's what's going to go to the other side. This was 25 times 9, which was positive. This is 1 times negative 16, which was negative. Yes, ma'am?
So if we're factoring, how come we don't factor out a y? And how come
Because we are not factoring yet.
Oh.
We are only getting rid of the coefficient
Oh,
so we can complete the square. You factor after you complete the square.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Same question this morning too. I think students get confused. So you're not alone on that for sure. Any other questions? Okay, what's the next thing I should do?
Wait, sorry, real quick. Where did the 225 come from?
25 times 9.
Oh, gotcha.
Oh, because we need completed the squares.
Okay, what's next?
Simplify.
Now I actually factor, right? Now is when I actually do the factoring. The 9 on the outside is just a 9 on the outside. Y squared minus 10y plus 25. Now you could factor that, or you could remember the trick. What's the trick? You remember that? Okay. Minus 16. How do those x's factor?
X plus 1.
You guys remember this now? Equals, now on the other side of the equal sign I have negative 353 plus 225 minus 16. Add all that, simplify, what do I get?
Negative 144.
Negative 144. Now, questions up to here. See how we have not started anything to do with the hyperbola quite yet. So, what do I need to do next?
Divide by
Divide by
144.
Divide by what?
Negative 144.
Negative 144, right? Because it needs to be a positive 1 on the other side. So I am going to divide. Don't add 145. Don't do it. Don't do it. I know you want to. Don't do it. Divide by negative 144. It's okay to divide by negative. That doesn't mean you're going to make the problem. This is fine. So far, so good? Then what? Simplify each fraction, right? I'm going to run out of space, I apologize, so I'm just going to have to move over here. So 9 over negative 144, does that fraction simplify?
Yeah.
And 9 goes into 144 16 times? So it's a negative now, right? Over here, these two negatives canceled. I got positive. Are there questions there? Is this in the standard form for a hyperbola? No.
Because it's positive.
It's positive in the middle. Look at your hyperbola. They're all negative in the middle, right? This guy has the negative over here. So don't I just have to switch those? So as I switch those, this is then going to become x plus 1 squared over 9. Now minus y minus 5 squared over 16 equals 1. Can you guys see what I did there? This is now the standard form for the hyperbola. This negative needs to be in the middle. So I took this negative, put it in the middle, and all I did was switch them. Do that one more time. I switched them. Maybe this might help. This negative right here could have just been here. Doesn't matter. And then I just flip them.
Okay.
Maybe that's helpful. Okay. This is now finally standard form for hyperbola. So now I can go through center, vertices, foci, and asymptotes. Whoo-wee, this is a good one. You guys like it so far? What's the first thing I find? Center. What's the center of this hyperbola? Okay. What's the next thing I do? Graph it. Okay. Alrighty. What's the first thing I plot? Center. So negative 1, 5. Center. What's the next thing I plot? How many units in the x direction should I be going? 3. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And again, you have to just pretend I'm a really good artist. I'm not so much, and I apologize. Okay. How many units in the y direction do I need to go?
4.
4. Why is it 4? Because 16, square root of 16 is 4. Why is it 3 in the x direction? Because square root of 9 is 3. Okay, so. And then what do I do? Okay. Who's okay with that? Okay, and then what was the next thing I did after the box? The asymptotes. So you graph those asymptotes from the center to the corner. From the center to the corner. Okay. And then what? So is this transverse horizontal or is this transverse vertical?
Horizontal.
Who says horizontal? Why? The x came first. So horizontal, so I pick the ones on the side. The x came first in the final simplified version, by the way. Not this one, this one. So, now, do I know my vertices?
Yes.
Yeah, so my vertices are what? It looks like I had 2, 5 and -4, 5. Is that right? I looked at my picture, I had moved 3 units over, so my 1, 2, 3, that gave me the 2. What about the foci? How do I find my foci? You identify what your C value is. So this is sort of my scratch work over here on the side. C squared equals A squared plus B squared. So C squared equals what? 9 plus 16. 3 squared plus 4 squared. So I got C squared equals 25. So C equals 5. Right? Do I move in the x direction or in the y direction? Why? Because it's transverse horizontal. So -1, really quick, before you write it down, watch this part. Because sometimes people miss it. I'm moving in the x direction, so look at my center. I take my x direction and I add my c value. So -1 plus 5 is where I get the 4 from. The y value stays the same. Do you guys see that okay? Then the -1 minus 5. So -1 minus 5 is what? Does that make sense to you guys? And then asymptote. So y minus y1 equals plus or minus, what's my slope in this case? 4/3. Rise over run, y over x. There we go. And then x minus -1.